The trade halls of Vameron rose from the moon's surface like a great curved blade, their interior vaulted with arching ribs of pale alloy. Diplomats from 43 sentient species walked the polished floors that morning, voices layered in 100 tongues, robes brushing against gilded columns. Servants moved between them with floating trays. Light poured from the high windows in colored shafts. Then she stepped through the eastern arch. A woman, small by most standards. No retinue, no armor plating, no weapon at her hip. She wore a dark traveling coat over plain field gear, her boots scuffed but clean. Her hair was pulled back without ornament. She carried a single satchel and nothing else. The chamber did not fall silent. The diplomats kept talking. The servants kept moving. The Vamerani heralds offered their bows and continued announcing newcomers. But three beings stopped breathing. The first was Warlord Corvin of the Drekari, whose ancestors had hunted the storm lizards of his homeworld for 10,000 years and survived. His third stomach tightened. The fur along his shoulders rose without his permission. The second was the Pakran matron Eshuvel, who had killed 9 challengers to claim her seat at the council and remembered the taste of every one. Her secondary eyelids slid shut. The third was the assassin who was not supposed to be there, the one in courtier's silks near the western pillar, who felt his weapon hand betray him with a tremor he had not produced since boyhood. None of them could explain it. The human woman was not large. She did not glare. She did not project. She crossed the floor with the easy gait of someone walking a familiar street, and yet every nerve in their bodies told them what their training never had. Predator. Not posturing, not the loud, chest-bared kind their own warriors performed before duels. Something older, quieter, the kind that had already chosen a target and was now only waiting for the right moment. Corvin turned to his attaché, a young Drekari named Velmor, whose eyes were still the bright orange of inexperience. "Who is that?" he said. His voice was rough. His throat felt dry. Velmor consulted his data lattice. The new human envoy, sent in place of ambassador work. Her file is short. Myra Halloran. Title. The young Drekari paused, frowning. Pathfinder, whatever that designates. Short file, Corvin repeated. 3 paragraphs. Birthplace, language credentials, and a note that she is authorized to negotiate on behalf of the Terran Compact. That's all. That's all. Corvin watched the woman accept a flute of pale liquid from a servant. She thanked the servant in the local tongue. Her accent was clean. She did not drink. "Get me her full file," the warlord said. "There is no." "Get me her full file." His voice dropped to a register that made the attaché's pupils contract. "Through every channel we have. I do not care what it costs. I want to know what walked into this hall." Across the chamber, Eshuvel was issuing similar orders to her own people. The Pakran matron's secondary eyelids opened again. She had decided, in the long instant after first seeing the woman, that she would not be the one to test her. Not today. Not ever, if the gods were kind. The human envoy turned as if she had felt the attention, and her gaze swept the room once. It was not a long look. It did not linger on any face. But it was a complete look. The look of someone counting exits, marking distances, assessing tools, and dismissing threats in a single pass. Then she smiled at no one in particular and continued toward the central dais, where the council awaited. Corvin realized his claws had extended through the soles of his ceremonial boots. He drew them back with effort. "Velmor," he said. "Warlord. Cancel my evening engagements. All of them." The Drekari warlord watched the small human woman ascend the dais steps and bow with practiced grace. "All of them. I am going to spend tonight learning what we have allowed to walk through our front door." Night fell over Vameron. The moon's atmosphere bled the upper sky a deep violet, and the lamps of the trade halls came up in tiered increments, painting the gardens in warm gold. In the Drekari embassy wing, Corvin paced before a wall of data screens. Files cascaded across them in 3 languages. His chief intelligence officer, an older female named Bran Tull, sat at the central console with her ears pinned flat. "What we have is fragments," she said. "The Terran Compact has been generous in most negotiations, but they are extraordinarily careful about what they release on their personnel." "Show me what you have." She tapped the console. An image appeared. The human woman, younger in some kind of pale survival suit, standing on a windswept ridge under an alien sky. Her face was thinner. Her eyes were the same. "Pathfinder," Brantull said. "It is a designation we did not have a translation for, because the humans do not use the term in their public diplomatic vocabulary. After cross-referencing with 3 intercepted military channels, we now have a working definition." "Give it to me." The older Drekari paused. She was choosing her words with care, which was unlike her. "A Pathfinder is a human who is sent, alone, into territory the Terran Compact considers too dangerous, too uncertain, or too politically delicate to commit a full force to. They go in without support. They observe. They survive. They return with the information their species needs to make decisions." "A scout." "That is the closest equivalent. But Warlord, the humans have many words for scouts. They have surveyors, observers, forerunners, advanced riders, reconnaissance specialists. The term Pathfinder is reserved for the ones who go where the others cannot." Corvin stopped packing. "How many are there?" Brantull checked her data. Records suggest the Terran Compact has, at any given time, fewer than 30 active Pathfinders out of a population of 14 billion. The Warlord absorbed that. Out of 14 billion, 30. He had felt the presence of one of them. He had felt his own ancestral instincts identify her as something that had already been chosen for difficult work and had returned from it more than once. "What about this one specifically, Halloran?" The image on the screen changed. Myra Halloran, 41 standard years, recruited at 23, currently the longest active Pathfinder in service. Decorations are heavily classified, but we recovered the citation list for one award. It mentions, and I am translating, that she walked out of the Talvarine front after the rest of her team was lost. She was alone for 92 days in hostile territory. She brought back data that allowed the Compact to negotiate the cessation of hostilities. "Walked out," Corvin repeated. "That is the verb used, not extracted, not recovered, walked out." The Warlord turned away from the screen and looked at the window. Out beyond the glass, the gardens of Vameron glowed softly. Somewhere in those gardens, the woman from the trade halls was probably taking the evening air, or sleeping, or doing whatever Pathfinders did when they were not being measured by frightened alien warriors. Brantull. "Warlord. What would happen if I challenged her?" The intelligence officer did not answer immediately. "I am asking you a tactical question, not an emotional one. What would happen?" Brantull looked at him with the steady calm of a Drekari who had served 3 warlords and watched 2 of them die badly. "You would lose, Corvin. I do not know how. I do not know what tool she would use. I do not know if it would be quick. But you would lose, and I would have to write your funeral oration, and I would prefer not to." He bared his teeth, but the gesture had no force behind it. They both knew she was right. He let out a long breath and turned back to the screen, where the younger Halloran stood on her windswept ridge, looking into a sky none of them had ever seen. "Schedule a meeting," he said. "Tomorrow, private channel, I want to speak with her." "That may not be wise." "I did not ask if it was wise." The meeting was set for the 11th hour of the Vamerani day, in a small chamber off the western wing reserved for private consultations. The walls were carved stone, soft to the touch, and the air carried the faint scent of the herb the Vamerani burned for clarity. Corvin arrived early. He did not sit. She came in at the exact hour. Not late, not early. She carried no escort and no recording device that he could see. She wore the same dark traveling coat from the previous day, though the field gear beneath it had been swapped for something simpler, almost soft. Her hair was loose now, falling past her shoulders. She inclined her head. Warlord. Pathfinder. Her eyebrows lifted by a fraction. She had not expected him to use the term. She gestured to one of the low chairs. Shall we? They sat. The chairs were Veymarani-made and not particularly comfortable for either of them. You requested this conversation, she said. Her voice was lower than he had expected. There was no theater in it. Corvin had prepared 3 opening questions and a half-dozen possible follow-ups. He discarded all of them. What are you? He said. She studied him for a long moment. Her eyes were a pale gray-green, and they did not move from his face. I am the envoy the compact sent. That is what you are called. I asked what you are. She considered the question. Then, with a small motion, she pushed the sleeve of her coat up past her elbow and laid her forearm on the low table between them. Her skin was crossed by a pale, raised scar that ran from her wrist to the inside of her elbow. The scar was not surgical. It was the kind that came from something serrated dragged across living flesh, and then closed by hands that had been in a hurry. I am someone who has walked through difficult places, she said, and come back to tell my people what was in them. Why does my body know to fear you? She let her sleeve fall. Because your body is honest, she said, and it has lived a long time on a world where survival meant recognizing certain shapes. I am one of those shapes. You are not large. I am not. You are not armed. I am not. Then how? She tilted her head. Warlord, may I ask you something? He nodded. How many of your kin have died in challenge against creatures who were larger than them, stronger than them, better armored? Many. How many died against the ones who looked harmless until the moment they did not? He was silent. The danger your body recognized in me, she said, is not in my size. It is in the fact that I have already decided what to do in this room, and in the next room, and in the corridor outside if any of those situations should require deciding. Your body sees that quality and it does what it was built to do. He stared at her. And what have you decided about me? He asked. His voice was rougher than he wanted it to be. She gave him a faint, tired smile. That you are a man who has been honest with himself today, which is more than most beings in this hall managed. He let out a long breath. The fur along his shoulders, which had been raised since the previous morning, settled at last. Halloran, why are you here? To negotiate the terms of human entry into the outer trade network. That is your stated mission. That is my real mission. I have no secret one. The Compact does not send Pathfinders to deceive. We are sent to observe and to be observed. To be observed. Yes. By whom? By the people who need to know what humans are, without the noise, without the displays, without the negotiating teams and the polished spokesmen and the well-fed military attachés. She rose from the chair. The audience was, by some signal he had not given, concluded. Warlord Corvin, she said, thank you for your honesty. It is a rare currency. She left. He sat in the carved stone room for a long time afterward, and somewhere down in the gardens, an alarm began to sound. The alarm climbed 3 octaves and locked at a pitch that meant breach. Corvin was on his feet before the second cycle. He moved through the corridors with the long stride of a Drekari accustomed to violence. Servants scattered before him. Diplomats huddled in archways. The Veymarani station guards were running toward the lower decks, weapons drawn, voices clipped. The breach was at Docking Bay 3. By the time he reached the upper gallery overlooking the bay, the situation was clear enough. 3 unmarked vessels had cut through the station's outer defenses with a precision that suggested either bribery or extraordinary intelligence. Boarders were pouring into the lower decks, humanoid, well-armed, armored in the matte plating favored by the Ruthkal cartels of the outer belts. They were taking hostages. Corvin counted 12 of them moving in disciplined fire teams. Behind their visors, he could not read faces, but he read formation. These were not pirates. These were corporate enforcers, and they had come for someone specific. He found out who when their team leader's voice came over the station's commandeered intercom. Citizens of Vameron, we are here for one individual. Surrender the human envoy Myra Halloran to us, and we will withdraw without further harm. Resist, and we will begin executing hostages at 5-second intervals. In the corridor below, the station guards halted. Their orders were not clear. The Vamerani prized neutrality, and the breach had occurred too fast for the council to convene. Corvin began moving toward the lower decks. He did not need to think about whether he would intervene. He did not need to weigh the politics of a Drekari warlord interfering in a Vamerani affair to protect a human he had only spoken with once. His body had decided before his mind caught up. But when he reached the central concourse, he stopped. She was already there. Myra Halloran stood at the edge of the open hall, dressed in the same plain field clothes, her hair tied back again. She carried nothing. She had walked into the open of her own accord. The boarders saw her. Their leader, a heavy-set figure with the markings of a Ruthkal captain, gestured his team forward. "Pathfinder," he said, his voice amplified by the visor. "We have a contract for your retrieval, live preferred. Cooperate and no one else has to be hurt." Myra looked at him. "You have hostages." "Behind us, in the holding area." "How many?" 23, various species." "Release them, then we can talk." The Ruthkal captain laughed. It was a wet sound through the visor's speaker. "That is not how this works." "I am offering you a path out of this room alive," Myra said. Her voice did not rise. "You should consider it." The captain stopped laughing. Corvin, from the upper gallery, found himself unable to look away. The captain gave a hand signal. His team moved to flank her, 6 of them advancing in a half-circle, weapons raised, the other 6 holding the corridor that led to the hostages. Myra's hand stayed at her sides. "I will count to 3, the captain said. He never reached 2. What happened next, Corvin would later try to describe to Brantull, and he would fail. The lights in the concourse flickered once. Myra had done something to a station maintenance panel as she walked past it, something he had not seen at the time. 2 of the boarders' visors went dark, blinded by an internal feedback pulse. Myra was already moving. She did not run. She walked. But the line of her walk was not the line a person walks in safety. It was the line of someone moving through known terrain, between known threats, on a path she had mapped with her eyes during the first conversation. The first boarder she reached was the one nearest the support column. She did not strike him. She redirected him, a small motion at the elbow, a turn of the hip, and his own forward momentum sent him into the column at full speed. He fell and did not get up. The second boarder fired at her, and the round went wide because she was no longer where she had been. In the gallery, Corvin heard himself breathe out. It had begun. The Ruthkal captain had served in 2 corporate wars and 1 revolution. He had killed 31 beings in close-quarters action and survived ambushes that had folded better teams. He had been told the contract was a high-value retrieval but not a hard one. The target was a diplomat, 41 standard years old, soft-shelled, untrained in combat. The contract had specified retrieval over termination because the buyer wanted information. He was, by the time he understood what was happening, the only member of his strike team still standing in the concourse. Myra Halloran had moved through his 6 advance fighters in the span of perhaps a dozen seconds. She had used the first boarder's body weight against the column. She had used the second boarder's weapon, briefly, before sending it spinning across the floor where no one could reach it. She had used the third boarder's faceplate against the fourth boarder's elbow. The fifth had tried to grapple her, and she had let him, because she had understood before he did that his suit's pressure seals would fail under the angle she applied to the shoulder joint. The sixth had been the smart one. He had backed away and tried to shoot her at distance. Corvin had watched her cross 15 meters of open floor in a way that the eye could track, but the mind could not quite categorize. She did not zigzag. She did not sprint. She moved in arcs that anticipated where the shots would be by the time they arrived, and when she closed on the sixth border, she took his weapon and did not use it. She used the strap around his throat from behind. He had stopped struggling within 4 seconds. Now she stood in the center of the concourse, breathing evenly, facing the captain across 30 meters of polished floor. "Your team," she said, "is not coming back. Your other 6 are still holding the hostages. I will give you the choice I offered before. Release them, walk to your ship, leave." The captain's hand was on his sidearm. He had not yet drawn it. Something in his nervous system was advising against it. "Who are you?" he said. His voice came out hoarse through the visor. "You read the contract. You know my name." "I read the contract. The contract did not say this." The contract was incomplete. He looked past her, toward the corridor where his second fire team waited. He had perhaps 10 seconds to make a decision, and the decision would determine whether he saw his homeworld again. In the gallery above, Corvin was already moving toward the side stairs. He could not let her face the second fire team alone, even though every observable piece of evidence from the last minute argued that she did not require help. There was a question of honor. There was a question of being able to look at himself in the morning. He need not have worried. The second fire team had been listening. They had also been watching, through their shared visor feed, what had happened to their advance squad. The Ruthkal were corporate enforcers, not fanatics. They were paid well, but they were paid to come home. The first one stepped out of the corridor with his hands raised. The others followed. 23 hostages were released over the next 2 minutes. Diplomats from 6 species, 3 Veymarani servants, a Pakran attaché who emerged weeping, and a young Drekari trade scribe whom Corvin recognized as the daughter of an old friend. The captain looked at Myra across the floor. He had not lowered his weapon, but he had not raised it either. "I have a wife," he said. "I know," Myra said. "She lives in the Hessian colony. You send her credits on the first of every cycle." He went very still. "How?" "I read your file before I came down here. While I was walking, I had time." He looked down at his weapon. He let it fall. "Captain," she said, "walk to your ship. Take your team. Tell whoever hired you that the contract failed because the target was not what they thought she was. Tell them also that the Terran Compact would like to know who you work for. That is a question we will be asking." He nodded, he turned, he walked. Above, Corvin finally exhaled. The council convened in emergency session before the Ruthkal vessels had cleared the moon's gravity well. It was, by any measure, the strangest emergency session in the institution's recorded history. The crisis had ended before the council could be summoned. The hostages had been released by their captors before any rescue could be ordered. The boarders had been disarmed and escorted from the station without a single death on the defending side and only mild injuries among the attackers. A single human woman in a coat and a pair of field boots had resolved an armed corporate incursion in under 4 minutes. The council did not know what to do with that. The Veymarani premier, an aged figure named Tathran Sai, opened the session and immediately yielded to Warlord Corvin, who had requested to speak first. This was itself unusual, but no one objected. Corvin stood at the speaker's circle. He had not slept. His ceremonial robes had been hastily pulled over his combat undergear. He looked, his attaché Velmore would later say, like a man who had seen the edge of something and stepped back from it carefully. "Members of the council," he began, "I will be brief, because I am tired and because what I have to say does not benefit from elaboration. Yesterday, I requested an intelligence file on the human envoy. The file I received told me that the Terran Compact employs a very small number of individuals called Pathfinders, who travel to difficult places alone and return with what their species needs to know." Murmurs through the chamber. Several delegates leaned forward. This morning I met with Pathfinder Halloran. I asked her what she was. She told me she was a person who had walked through difficult places. I believed her. My belief was perhaps incomplete. He paused. This afternoon, I watched her walk through 12 armed Ruthcal corporate operatives in less time than it took my heralds to assemble the security response. She did not use a weapon. She did not raise her voice. She did not, at any point, appear to be in distress. She rescued 23 hostages, including a member of my own extended family. She allowed the surviving boarders to leave with their lives, on the condition that they report back to their employer. He looked around the chamber. I am a warlord of the Drekari. My bloodline has produced 16 generations of military leaders. I have killed in challenge. I have killed in war. I have served on 3 of this council's intervention forces, and I have looked into the face of more deaths than I care to count. I tell you all this so that you will understand the weight of what I am about to say. He drew a measured breath. I was afraid of her from the moment she entered the trade halls. I did not know why. My body knew before my mind did. I now understand what my body knew. The humans, members of the council, are not what we have been told. They are not soft. They are not unsophisticated. They are not new to violence. They have simply learned, over the course of their development, to make their violence so efficient that it can travel in a single individual, in a plain coat, with no escort, and resolve a crisis that would have required a full Drekari boarding company. The chamber had gone still. I propose, Corvin said, that we accept the Terran Compact's application to the Outer Trade Network. I propose that we do so with full membership rights and without further objection. I propose, also, that we begin negotiating with humanity from the position of beings who understand, finally, what we are negotiating with. The Pakran matron Eshuvel rose. Her secondary eyelids were open. Her voice was steady. Seconded. The vote was called within the hour. It carried by a margin that surprised no one in the room. In her quarters, 3 levels above the chamber, Myra Halloran was packing her single satchel. She had been informed of the vote by the station's communications system. She had nodded once, said thank you to the relay clerk, and resumed folding her field gear. She had a ship to catch. The Veymarani spaceport was quieter than usual the next morning. Word of the incursion had spread to every delegation, and the diplomatic traffic had thinned as several missions reassessed their schedules. The Ruthcal cartel had been formally censured by 3 governments before the morning was over, and an investigation into the corporate party that had funded the strike was already underway. Myra Halloran walked across the departure platform with the same single satchel she had arrived with. Her coat was the same. Her boots were the same. Her hair was tied back again. Warlord Corvin stood at the edge of the platform, in formal robes, with 2 of his honor guard a respectful distance behind him. She stopped when she reached him. Warlord. Pathfinder. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Around them, the spaceport's morning routine continued, loading crews, fueling crews, the soft hum of departure protocols cycling in the deck plates. You did not have to come down here, she said. I am aware. Then why? He considered the question seriously. Because yesterday I asked you what you were, and you answered me as honestly as you could. I owe you a return of that honesty. I came to tell you what I learned. She waited. I learned that my species has been preparing for a long time to meet a galactic neighbor who would be larger than us, or louder than us, or stronger than us. We thought of every shape that threat might take. We did not prepare for the shape that arrived in the door of our trade hall, in a quiet coat, with a quiet voice, and changed our understanding of what humans are in less time than it takes for our council to vote on a luncheon menu. She smiled faintly. I appreciate that. There is something I do not understand, he said. May I ask? You may. Why send you alone? Why send one Pathfinder to a galactic summit? The Terran Compact has thousands of trained diplomats. Why send the one whose presence makes warriors of 7 species lose their appetite? She adjusted the strap of her satchel. Because we have learned, Warlord, that words are an unreliable way to communicate what humans are. Our diplomats can negotiate trade terms and treaty clauses and resource allocations. They cannot make you understand what we are made of. We have found that the only thing which conveys that accurately is to send one of us in person, without the words, without the noise, and to let the people who needed to know. And if no crisis had occurred, if the boarders had not come, what would you have done? She looked past him, at the rising line of her ship beyond the platform's edge. I would have stayed 3 days, attended the receptions, said little, eaten with the delegates, walked the gardens, and gone home. Most of my visits go that way. The information transmits regardless. The predators in the room always know. The matter of whether they choose to act on what they know is up to them. He absorbed that. And if I had challenged you, Pathfinder, in the carved stone room, as I considered doing. She turned her gaze back to him. Her gray-green eyes were warm now and tired. And very old, in a way that had nothing to do with the years of her life. You would not have, she said, because you are an honest man, and honest men do not challenge what they do not yet understand. That is one of the reasons your species is going to do well in our company, Warlord. There are not many honest beings in the galaxy. We notice the ones there are. She extended her hand, the human gesture, palm flat, fingers loose. He took it. Her grip was firmer than he had expected and warmer. Travel well, Pathfinder. Treat my people kindly, Warlord. She walked across the platform to her ship and did not look back. The vessel rose with the same understated efficiency she had carried in everything else, and within 10 minutes it was a fading point of light against the moon's violet sky. Corvin stood watching long after the point had vanished. He had work to do, so did the rest of the galaxy. But for that moment, on the empty platform, he simply stood and learned what it felt like to have been seen, and judged and found honest by the quietest predator he would ever meet.